The first thing they will never believe is that we arrived before we departed. I have replayed the logs 100 times, cross-checked every reading, every timestamp. It does not matter. The data is impossible, and yet it stands immutable before me. This is Lieutenant Amuon Vera, Imperial Navy, second officer aboard the Orison. Per inquisitorial mandate, this record is to be transmitted on sealed channel Theta Vermilion for review by the Ordo Xenos. Classification Omega Black. If you are hearing this, either we succeeded, or you are already too late. The Orison departed Port Adrexia at 0400 shipboard standard. Our mission was clear: locate a missing pilgrim flotilla bound for the shrine world of Armethes. 5 transports, 30,000 souls, vanished in a region of space Imperial cartographers mark as the Veil of Thrinity. The charts do not merely warn against passage, they display only a blank expanse marked by a single phrase: no approach. The Ecclesiarchy insists this region is cursed, an echoing wound in the void. The Adeptus Mechanicus, of course, call it uncharted, and thus worthy of study. For us it was an assignment, nothing more. The Orison was fully stocked and blessed for the journey. 6,000 crew, plus 300 naval armsmen. A Mechanicus detachment under Megus Drael to oversee the Geller field and experimental telemetry augurs. An ecclesiarchal chorus to tend to the pilgrims aboard, their hymns echoing through the devotional decks. And finally, a silent inquisitorial attaché, whose name was never given, only a black rosette clasped at their chest. At first the voyage was unremarkable. Days of warp transit passed under regulation. I made my inspections by rote, reciting the litany of bearings as I walked the main spine. The familiar rhythms of the ship gave me comfort: the hiss of ventilation cycles, the low thrum of the plasma drives, the ever-present scent of oil and incense clinging to the steel corridors. But as we neared the edge of the veil, anomalies began to manifest. The Auspex arrays faltered, returning fractured echoes that resembled no known stellar formations. Our Vox channels began to carry a thin undercurrent of sound, static at first, but beneath it, whispers, always just at the edge of hearing. When I questioned the Vox officers, they swore they heard nothing. The first sign that something was wrong came in the observatorium. It was a vast dome of plasteel lined with stained glass depicting the Emperor's ascension. From there, one could see the warp shimmer against the void, a reminder of the Emperor's light guiding our vessel. Yet that night, the stars were dim, faded, a blackness deeper than space itself swallowed their light at the edges of vision. I remember staring into it and feeling not fear but hunger, a pull subtle and insistent, as though it wanted me to step closer to the glass. By regulation we initiated shipwide prayers to fortify the Geller field. The ecclesiarchal choir sang until their voices cracked, their hymns carried through every deck. Still the darkness grew thicker. The Mechanicus assured us all readings were nominal. Drael's Benharic chants filled the engine shrine, cold and precise. Their faith was in data alone. The moment of crossing came without warning. One instant we were at the boundary of mapped space, the next we were inside the veil. Every lumen aboard dimmed to a dull red glow. Gravity shuddered, then steadied. A moment of total silence enveloped the ship, as though sound itself had been smothered. Then all chronometers across the vessel reset simultaneously, every display blinking to 0. In the navigator's sanctum, Cythris screamed a single word in a language none of us knew before collapsing into catatonia. The Geller field pulsed once, violently, rattling bulkheads throughout the ship. I took command by reflex, my voice steady even as my hands trembled. Emergency rites were enacted. Vox calls to every deck were issued. No response returned except static and the faint, rhythmic cadence of those same distant whispers. As the crew scrambled to restore order, I looked out the main viewport. The stars were gone. The warp shimmer was. There was nothing beyond the glass but an endless, suffocating void. We had crossed the threshold, and somewhere deep within the Orison, something stirred awake. The first hour after our entry into the veil was defined by confusion, the second by fear. By the third, I began to suspect that hour no longer had meaning. I ordered immediate status reports from every deck, demanding precise timespans for each update. The results were maddeningly inconsistent. One report claimed to be delivered at 0213, another at 0047, while a third arrived stamped 0459. Though all were sent within moments of each other, When I confronted the Vox officers, they swore their chronometers had been accurate at the moment of transmission. It was then I noticed that my own wrist chrono was frozen at 00. A bulkhead maintenance team reported reaching Section 34B to conduct routine checks, only to find another team already there, completing the same tasks. Both swore they had left their barracks mere minutes before, yet each claimed the other was lying. Even I began to feel the subtle slippage. I would blink and find myself halfway through a command I did not remember giving, with no recollection of the moments between. To impose order, I conducted a tour of the ship, accompanied by a small escort of armsmen. The Orison was a fortress of steel and faith, its corridors lined with purity seals and devotional icons. But as we walked, I sensed a growing wrongness beneath the familiar structure. Litanies painted on the walls had begun to peel in strange curling patterns. Some were inverted, their holy text now unreadable. Moisture clung to the air vents though the humidity gauges reported normal levels. In certain passages, the humming of the ventilation shifted into a low, almost human murmur. As we moved, I considered the forces at play aboard this vessel. The Navy crew, disciplined and loyal, were growing restless under strain. The Adeptus Mechanicus contingent, led by Megos Drail, seemed energized by the anomaly, recording every distortion with ritualistic fervor. The ecclesiarchy pilgrims huddled in prayer, their chants rising louder with every passing moment, though I cannot call them ours anymore. Over all of us loomed the silent figure of the inquisitorial attaché, who never spoke, only observed, their black rosette gleaming like an accusation. By the time we reached Deck 7, tension was palpable. Crew members whispered that they had seen others moving in hallways where none should have been. Some swore entire corridors had shifted, though no structural breaches were detected. One armsman confided to me in a hoarse whisper that he had awoken in his bunk to find himself already standing at attention in the corridor outside. He begged for permission to be locked in the brig for his own sanity. It was then that the first true casualty was discovered. A Mechanicus servitor was reported inactive near the Geller field access. Such malfunctions are rare but not impossible, and I thought little of it until we arrived. The sight before us defied every expectation. The servitor had been entirely disassembled, its limbs and augmetics neatly arranged in a circle around its torso. There was no sign of tools, no evidence of violence, no blood, no oil. Even the cranial wiring was perfectly coiled, as though laid out by a precise and patient hand. Megos Drail examined the remains in silence, his mechadendrites twitching in agitation. When I asked for an explanation, he recited a string of Benharic code I could not decipher, then stated flatly, "This was no error of machine, this was intention." I ordered the remains secured and quarantined. The ecclesiarchy chorus performed purification rites, their voices trembling. Some of the younger choir members refused to enter the chamber at all, claiming they could feel the servitors screaming in the air. We had barely begun to process this discovery when the klaxons erupted. The sound was deafening, a deep grinding howl that shook the deck plates beneath our feet. Crew scattered, shouting reports over the Vox. I sprinted to the nearest terminal demanding data. The readouts froze, then flickered into an image of our ship, a simple wireframe surrounded by navigational markers. The display blinked once, and new coordinates appeared. The words "Arrival confirmed" flashed across every screen. The bridge confirmed what I already feared. According to every instrument aboard, the Orison had reached its destination. But outside the observation ports, there were no stars, no planetary body, no sign of the missing pilgrim flotilla. Only an unbroken expanse of blackness, so deep, it seemed to swallow light itself. Confusion turned swiftly to panic. Officers argued over readings, shouting over one another. Megos Drail insisted the sensors were functioning perfectly, that we had indeed arrived where we were meant to be. The ecclesiarchy declared it a test of faith, a void placed by the emperor to judge our worthiness. I silenced them all and stared into that impossible darkness. My throat was dry, my mind racing through every regulation, every precedent. There was none. This was beyond the known. Then, from deep within the ship, a faint sound began to rise, a soft, steady rhythm like a heartbeat echoing through the steel. It reverberated through the deck plates, subtle but insistent. I realized, with a chill that pierced me to the bone, that it was something in that endless black was measuring us, watching us, and we had only just begun to understand what it wanted. The darkness outside did not merely obscure the stars, it devoured them. Even the faint glow of the warp, that eternal shimmer beyond the Geller field, was gone. When I first looked through the observation dome, I thought the ports had been shuttered or clouded by debris. But no, Our view was unbroken, flawless and utterly black. It was not the absence of light, it was the presence of something far worse. Magos Drael and his adepts worked feverishly to analyze the void readings. They muttered Ben-Harak hymns as they ran data loops through the augur arrays, each sequence returning stranger results than the last. When I demanded a status report, Drael's voice came through his vox grill in an emotionless monotone. Auspex patterns are consistent. Their form is not random. This is language. Language. The word chilled me. He displayed the most recent data on a hololith projector. Where I expected stellar charts or navigational lines, there appeared only twisting geometric shapes that shifted and folded in upon themselves. Some resembled sigils I vaguely recognized from ancient Mechanicus rites. Others, like the curves of holy symbols seen in ecclesiarchal scripture. The ecclesiarchy representatives were summoned to interpret the images. Their leader, Caninus Selen, turned pale at the sight, whispering that the patterns resembled heretical inversions of imperial liturgy. While they argued over meaning, I led a small team to Observation Deck 9 to check the physical integrity of the ports. We moved carefully through the dimly lit corridors, our footfalls unnaturally loud against the metal plating. The silence pressed in on us, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's power core. When we reached the deck, I was struck by how cold the air had become. Breath misted before our faces, though environmental controls registered normal temperature. The great stained glass mural of the Emperor that dominated the far wall had changed. At first glance it was intact, its golden and crimson panes gleaming faintly in the lumen light. But as we drew nearer, horror tightened in my chest. The Emperor's features were gone. Where once had been the serene visage of the master of mankind, there was now only blank, formless glass. The armsmen muttered prayers, their voices cracking. I forced mine to steadiness as I contacted the bridge. No ants static filled my vox. But beneath it I thought I heard something, a whispering so faint, I could not be sure it was real. As we withdrew, one of my men swore he saw movement beyond the port glass. I turned sharply, but there was nothing, just that endless black pressing against the ship like a physical weight. I told him he was mistaken, though I did not entirely believe it myself. When we returned to the bridge, the situation had worsened. Crew reports flooded in from all decks, navigational corridors subtly shifting, as if bulkheads had been rearranged while no one was watching. Gravity failing in certain sections, leaving tools and bodies floating until the systems abruptly reactivated. Entire compartments where sound seemed muted, as though voices were swallowed before leaving the throat. The ecclesiarchy declared this a test from the Emperor. The Mechanicus countered that the anomalies were a natural side effect of our proximity to the Veil's core. Their arguments grew heated, bordering on violence, until I ordered them silenced under penalty of brig confinement. Even then, the tension remained like a live wire humming through the command deck. At 00000000 at his shipboard time, though that designation had lost all meaning, the first signal came through, a vox transmission faint and broken, barely discernible amidst static. The officers strained to isolate it, their hands trembling over the control. Slowly, painfully, the message resolved into words. It was a voice, a human voice, whispering, not from the void outside, as we first assumed, but from within the ship. The coordinates given matched a location deep within the Orison's secondary habdecks, an area long sealed and unused since before my commission. The voice repeated the same line 3 times before fading into silence. Each repetition was identical, tone, cadence, even the slight hitch of breath between syllables, too perfect to be natural. Crew morale frayed instantly. Some begged to abandon that sector entirely, to seal it off, and never return. Others argued we must investigate, that failing to do so risked further contamination. I made the decision with cold certainty. A security sweep would be conducted at once. Better to face the unknown than allow it to fester. Before the team could deploy, another anomaly struck. The ship's entire network of lumens flickered, plunging every deck into darkness for 3 full seconds. When the lights returned, something had changed. We could all feel it. The Orison no longer felt like our ship. Corridors seemed longer, angles sharper, as though the vessel itself was subtly reshaped while our eyes were closed. Even the air tasted different, metallic and acrid. The Mechanicus claimed no systems registered alterations. The ecclesiarchy declared it a sign of spiritual intrusion. The inquisitorial attaché remained silent, their gloved hands clasped behind their back, watching us like a predator judging prey. I looked once more into the void beyond the glass. The blackness seemed closer now, pressing in, smothering every trace of light. It felt alive, and for the first time, I wondered if the Orison had truly traveled here of its own power, or if something had reached out, taken hold and drawn us in. The whispering returned, softer than before, echoing faintly through the bulkheads. This time, it was not word, it was laughter. The laughter faded as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the rasping breaths of the bridge crew. No one spoke, even the ever-chattering adepts of the Mechanicus were motionless, their mechadendrites curled tight in uneasy stillness. I gave the order for full security lockdown. All non-essential personnel were confined to quarters under guard. A strike team of armsmen was assembled, each one personally blessed by the ecclesiarchy before departure. Their faces were pale beneath their helmets, but their lasguns were steady, and that would have to suffice. We moved through the dim corridors with deliberate precision, marking each junction with glow strips to track our progress. Already, the ship was shifting beneath. Passageways that should have led to sealed storage chambers now opened into unfamiliar stretches of hallway. Some ended abruptly at blank bulkheads, while others twisted back toward the starting point, as if mocking our effort. I could feel it. The Orison was no longer a static construct of steel and rivets. It was moving, adapting, learning. Gravity failed without warning in a long corridor, connecting two of the habdecks. One moment our boots clanged against the deck plating, the next we were adrift in perfect silence, tools and fragments of scripture, floating around us like debris in a tide. A whispered prayer from one of the armsmen steadied the group as we activated maglocks and continued onward, step by step, the darkness around us seeming to breathe. We found the first sign of the transmission's origin at the junction leading toward the old pilgrim quarter. There, faint and unmistakable, came a sound none of us wished to hear, the same rhythm from before, a slow and deliberate chime, 9 notes repeating endlessly. The noise emanated from the very walls vibrating through the plate. Each tone seemed to burrow into my skull, carrying with it the taste of copper and the memory of dreams I had never dreamt. The men shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on triggers. "Stay sharp," I ordered, though my own voice sounded strange to my ears, hollow and distant. The corridor widened into an antechamber we all knew by heart, a shrine dedicated to the Emperor's mercy. It should have been filled with rows of devotional icons and aged prayer scrolls. Instead, the chamber was pristine, utterly empty save for a single candle flickering at the center. The flame cast sharp, unnatural shadows, far larger than they had any right to be. Around the candle lay the remnants of recent offerings, wax drippings, burnt incense, and the faint lingering scent of sacred oils. Someone had been here, though no one admitted to tending this shrine for months. The ecclesiarchal guards began to chant softly, voices trembling, until I silenced them with a raised hand. The presence of that candle was wrong. It was not merely evidence of trespass, it was a message. We advanced deeper, the 9-note chime growing loud. Then we reached the sealed chamber marked on the transmission coordinates. The doors were ancient and rusted, their purity seals long decayed. Magos Drail's adepts initiated the override sequence, Dinharic cants spilling from their vox synths. The final lock disengaged with a hiss of stale air. Inside was darkness so complete it seemed to drink the lumen light from our torches. We stepped forward cautiously, our beams cutting narrow cones into the void. The floor was slick beneath our boots, though no moisture was detected by the sensor. As we spread out, I realized there were shapes along the walls, beds, storage containers, personal relics, all fused together as though the very metal had flowed like wax and reformed. The vox hissed sharply in my ear. Movement detected. One of the armsmen whispered, "Rear section, 2 meters." His voice cut off in a strangled gasp. We spun around to see only empty air. His weapon floated for a heartbeat before dropping to the deck with a clatter. There was no sign of him, not even the echo of his breathing. Panic surged through the squad, barely held in check by drilled discipline. I called for a perimeter, demanding constant reports. As they obeyed, the lumen torches flickered, casting warped shadows across the fused furniture. For an instant I saw something. No, someone standing at the far end of the chamber, a silhouette, indistinct and wavering, as if viewed through boiling water. "Identify yourself," I shouted. My words vanished into the darkness, swallowed before they could act. The figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, then dissolved into mist. We retreated in controlled formation, weapons raised, but the tension was fraying. Every man and woman in that squad felt the same thing. We were no longer hunters. We were prey, being herded where it wanted us to go. As we reached the junction, the ship's vox system flared to life without warning. The 9-note chime rang out from every speaker at once, a deafening, dissonant wave of sound that drove some of the men to their knees. When it ceased, a voice replaced it,
A clear, calm human voice, speaking the names of crew members. At first we thought it was a casualty list, then we realized every name spoken belonged to someone still alive. The final name spoken was mine. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence and the pounding of our hearts. I gave the order to fall back to the bridge, my voice sharp and commanding, though inside I felt a cold certainty settle in my bones. Whatever haunted this ship did not merely know us, it was counting us, one by one, and now, it had spoken my name. We returned to the bridge in a state of grim silence. None of us spoke of what we had seen or failed to see in that chamber. The men avoided my gaze, and I did not blame them. To give voice to the truth would have been to admit that it was real. The bridge crew froze at our arrival, their faces pale and strained, but they quickly resumed their duties, pretending a semblance of normality that fooled no one. The air tasted wrong here now, acrid and metallic, like blood left too long on cold steel. Magos Drail was waiting for me. His augmetic limbs twitched with suppressed agitation as he displayed fresh Auspex recording. The images that shimmered into existence above the command dais were unlike anything I had seen before. Geometric shapes cascaded and folded in precise rhythm, repeating in fractal loops. They shifted so rapidly that staring at them for too long made my vision blur and my stomach roar. "This is no random distortion," Drail said, his vox synth flat but urgent. "The void itself is inscribing these patterns into our systems. They are instructions perhaps, or a hymn." The word chilled me. Canonis Solen, who had been overseeing the ecclesiarchal choir, moved forward with trembling hands clutching a relic of beaten gold. She stared at the shifting symbols and whispered, "I have seen these marks before. They resembled the sacred architecture of cathedral schematics, but corrupted, defiled." Drail dismissed her interpretation with a rasping burst of Binharik. "The machine god does not concern itself with superstition. These are structural blueprints rendered in code." As they argued, I began to notice a terrible connection. The symbols formed repeating grids, and circles, symmetrical but subtly uneven. At first, I thought they were maps of the region we were trapped in. Then realization struck me like a hammer blow. These patterns matched the internal schematics of the Orison itself. The ship was not merely within this anomaly, it was part of it. I interrupted their bickering, demanding confirmation. Reluctantly, Drail admitted that the data did indeed mirror the vessel's layout. Worse still, the pattern was incomplete, as though one final piece had yet to be added. Before I could question him further, an alarm klaxon wailed. A hab deck had gone silent. No vox response, no life sign. I led a squad personally to investigate, unwilling to send others into the dark without my presence. The corridor, leading to that sector, was thick with haze. It clung to our armor like fine mist, smelling faintly of burnt paper and incense. As we advanced, the haze grew denser, until visibility shrank to a few paces. Our footfalls were muffled, as though the air itself were smothering sound. When we breached the main hatch, the haze dispersed, revealing a scene I will never forget. The entire deck was coated in ash. It lay thick upon the floor and bulkheads, soft as fresh snow. At first, I thought it had been some environmental malfunction, a fire venting through the ducts. Then I saw the outlines, bodies. The ash had settled in perfect silhouettes of men, women and children. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, frozen mid-motion, a mother reaching for her child, a priest with arms raised in eternal prayer. They were gone, utterly consumed, leaving only these ghostly impressions. One of my armsmen broke ranks and fled screaming. The rest stood in stunned silence, unable to move. I forced myself forward, crouching to touch the nearest shape. The ash crumbled beneath my fingers, revealing bare, unmarked metal beneath. No trace of heat damage, no trace of struggle. Canonis Solen fell to her knees sobbing. She wailed prayers to the Emperor, begging him to preserve our souls. Drail, by contrast, was eerily calm. His mechadendrites swayed as he scanned the scene. "This is not destruction," he intoned. "This is subtraction." I demanded an explanation, but he only repeated the word, his vox crackling with static. We withdrew, sealing the deck behind us. The surviving armsman whispered of daemons, of the Geller field failing, but I knew, deep down, that this was something stranger. The void was not merely killing, it was reshaping. Back on the bridge, Drail completed his analysis. He displayed the updated schematics. Now the pattern was clear. The missing section of the design, the final piece needed to complete the sequence, was located deep in the ship's lower decks, in a sector long believed to be storage. Canonis Solen recoiled in horror. "This is not a map," she hissed. "It is a ritual. The ship itself is the altar. The prayers of the faithful, the blood of the crew, all fuel for something vast and profane." The bridge erupted into chaos. Some crew fell to their knees, reciting litanies of warding. Others shouted for immediate evacuation. I stood frozen, my mind raced. The transmission, the shifting corridors, the ash outlines, they were all part of this design. Then the vox crackled. A distorted voice whispered from the speakers, speaking words in no language I knew. Drail translated, his tone strangely reverent. The pattern nears completion, he said. The altar awaits its final chamber. The bridge fell silent. Somewhere below us, in the unseen depths of the ship, a place we had never walked was waiting, and it was calling us by name. I assembled a mixed unit to descend into the lower decks, hand-picking each member with care. 2 squads of armsmen for security, 3 of Drail's Mechanicus adepts for analysis, and 1 ecclesiarchal priest to bless every step we took. I went myself, of course. I could not command from a distance when the heart of this darkness lay beneath. The inquisitorial attaché followed without a word, their expression as unreadable as ever. No one questioned their presence. The access points to the ship's underdecks had been sealed for decades, according to the record. When we reached the first hatch, I knew immediately that those records had lied. The seals had been broken and reaffixed many times, layers of wax and scripture, piled atop one another like scabs on an old wound. The prayers inscribed upon them were warped, letters reversed and scrambled. Caninus Solen refused to touch them, making only the sign of the Aquila before retreating behind the armsmen. It took nearly an hour for the Mechanicus to cut through the locks. As the final barrier gave way, a draft of air escaped the darkness below. It was cold enough to freeze the breath in our lungs, and it carried with it a faint metallic tang like rusted iron. A few of the men gagged. One vomited inside his rebreather, and was forced to fall back. We descended in single file, our lumen packs cutting narrow cones through the absolute black. The walls here were wrong. They were too smooth, too seamless, as though they had not been built but grown. There were no rivets, no weld lines, none of the sacred signs of imperial construction. The usual comforting hum of the ship's systems was absent. Only our own breathing filled the silence, ragged and unsteady. As we advanced, I realized the proportions of the corridors were subtly shifted. One passage would narrow to a claustrophobic crawl space, only for the next to open into a cavernous chamber, vast enough to contain a gun battery. The transition was seamless, unnatural. I marked the changes carefully on my datapad, though even as I did so, I felt a sick certainty that the data would be useless. The Orison was not static here, it was alive. At last, we reached a chamber unlike any other. It was circular, perfectly symmetrical, with no visible source of light, yet the air glimmered faintly as if lit from within. In the center stood an altar, though altar feels too inadequate a word. It was a construction of metal and flesh, pipes and sinew entwined, so seamlessly they could not be distinguished. Some parts resembled Mechanicus machinery, sacred cogs, and gears inscribed with Binharic cant. Others pulsed like living organs, veins throbbing beneath a translucent membrane. The Mechanicus adepts fell to their knees, whispering ecstatic prayers. Caninus Solen screamed in denial, declaring it blasphemy. I stood frozen, my breath misting in the frigid air, unable to speak.
The altar was incomplete. That much was obvious. Slots and sockets yawned empty, awaiting components not yet placed. Around its base lay fragments of metal and bone, discarded as though in the midst of assembly. By the Omnissiah, Drail's voice was a hiss of awe. It is a machine of worship, a conduit between the real and the unreal. This was not built by mortal hands. I wanted to order him silent, to tear my eyes from that nightmare fusion of technology and flesh. But before I could speak, one of the armsmen stumbled. He had stepped on a slick patch of floor hidden beneath the thin frost. 2 others rushed to help him, hauling him upright. We turned to leave, shaken and eager to retreat, when I heard the first scream. It was brief, strangled and horribly familiar. We spun around and froze. There were 2 identical copies of the fallen armsmen standing side by side. They mirrored one another perfectly. Same armor, same rank markings, same terrified expression. For a moment, none of us moved. Then one of them collapsed to the floor, convulsing. The other remained standing, eyes wide and unblinking. I shouted for Medicae support, my voice hoarse. The Mechanicus scanned both bodies, their auspex chirping wildly with readings they refused to explain. As the convulsions ceased, the prone form exhaled one final breath, and lay still. The survivor, the one still standing, turned to me. His lips trembled, his body shaking violently. Then he opened his mouth. The voice that emerged was not his own. It was the navigator's voice, calm and measured, speaking words she had never known in life. "You are late," it said. "The pattern nears completion. The altar hungers. You will finish what was begun." The echo of her tone filled the chamber, rising and falling like a chant. The armsmen staggered back, weapons half raised. Selene fell to her knees, weeping and clutching her relic, as if it could shield her from what she was hearing. I stepped forward, forcing my terror down into the pit of my stomach. "Cythra," I demanded, using the navigator's name, "what is this place? What does it want?" The duplicate's head tilted at an unnatural angle, bones cracking beneath the skin. Its mouth stretched wider than any human's should. "You built it," the voice whispered. "You always build it. You will always build it." The lumen packs flickered, plunging us into momentary darkness. When light returned, the duplicate was gone. Only the corpse remained, lying in a pool of frost. We fled that chamber without hesitation, sealing the hatch behind us. My thoughts were a storm of doubt and fear. If this place had always been part of the Orison, hidden beneath our feet, then how many times had we walked above it, unaware? And worse still, if what it said was true, how many times had we already finished the pattern? As we ascended, the void itself seemed to thrum around us, deep and resonant, like the heartbeat of something vast and waiting. Whatever had been born in that hidden deck was not finished, but it would be soon. We sealed the hatch and sealed our lips, speaking nothing of what had occurred, until we were clear of the lower decks. Even then, silence clung to us like a shroud. Each step upward felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the ship itself resisted our escape. By the time we reached the main hab levels, some of the armsmen were muttering half-remembered prayers, their voices trembling, their eyes wild. I could not bring myself to silence them. When we reached the bridge, the air was staler than before, tinged with ozone and a subtle sweetness that made the back of my throat itch. The crew stared at us as though they could smell where we had been. No words were exchanged. They knew something had followed us back. The survivor, the one whose voice had been the navigator's, was carried under guard to the Medicae Bay. Drael insisted on accompanying us, claiming he alone could interpret whatever phenomenon had overtaken the man. The inquisitorial attaché followed silently, as always. The Medicae servitors restrained the body with chains and sanctified clamps, reciting machine prayers as they locked each limb in place. Even restrained, the man twitched, his mouth moving as though forming words we could not hear. Then the lights flickered, and his voice returned. It was not a scream or a shout. It was a whisper, calm and cold, filling every vox channel across the ship simultaneously. It came not from the body before us, but from everywhere at once. The ventilation ducts, the lumen housings, the very walls of the Orison. "You are late," the voice said, as it had in the hidden chamber. "You are always late." Drael's mechadendrites froze mid-motion. Selene clutched her relic so tightly that blood welled between her fingers. I forced myself to speak, to wrest some control back from the madness encroaching on us. "Navigator Cythra," I demanded, "if this is you, give us proof. Tell me something only you would know." The whispering ceased for a heartbeat. Then, in the exact tone and cadence of the navigator herself, the voice recited the coordinates of our departure from Port Adraxia. It described the litany she had sung before engaging the warp engine. It spoke of a dream she had confided to me privately on the second day of our voyage, a dream I had never told another soul. The bridge fell silent. There was no doubt. "This is no mere possession," Drael rasped, his voice cracking with static. "This is transmission, a signal flowing through the warp, using the flesh as conduit." The voice laughed softly, a sound like wind through broken glass. "Flesh is merely a vessel. Memory is the river. You are all connected, as you have always been." Before we could respond, the lights guttered and died. In the pitch black, I heard the breathing of the crew, ragged, terrified. Then the voice returned, louder now, resonant. "The ship is not lost. It was summoned. You were brought here by will, not chance." I groped for meaning, my mind racing. Summoned? By what? And for what purpose? "The altar waits," the voice continued. "The dream is the door. Sleep, and you will see." As the last words faded, the lumen strips surged back to life. The restrained body on the Medicae slab had stilled, its eyes wide open and unseen. Whatever force had spoken through it was gone for now. "Magus." Drael immediately began scanning the remains, his augmetics chirping with frantic Dinharic cant. "Dreams," he muttered. "The signal is embedded in the unconscious mind. It feeds on neural activity during If we are correct, His voice trailed off as if the conclusion was too terrible to name. Selene answered for him, her voice breaking. Sleep itself is the weapon. We are under siege in our very thoughts. Her words were confirmed within the hour. Crewmen began to report nightmares. Vivid, shared nightmares. Men and women who had never spoken to one another described identical visions. A vast cathedral constructed of bone and steel, with a throne of teeth at its center. They described chanting voices, speaking in languages no mortal tongue could form. Some awoke screaming, others weeping, and a few did not wake at all. I ordered immediate sleep deprivation protocols. No one was to rest without direct supervision. The Medicae bays filled with stimulants, their bitter scent mingling with the tang of incense and oil. Still, exhaustion crept in. I saw it in the twitching eyes of my officers, in the trembling hands of the armsmen. I felt it in myself, an ache, deep behind the eyes that no prayer could banish. Meanwhile, Drail and his adepts experimented on those who had fallen into the deepest sleeps. What they discovered shook even their mechanized stoicism. The dreamers' brainwaves formed patterns identical to the symbols we had seen in the Auspex readout. Their very thoughts were shaping the ship's reality. Some of the experiments went further than I allowed. I caught glimpses of them when Drail thought me absent. Flesh grafted with circuitry, skulls open to reveal glimmering implants. A few of the subjects still breathed. A few even spoke, though their words were nonsense, a litany of numbers and screams. As discipline crumbled, I began to suffer micro-sleeps despite my best effort. I would blink, and find myself standing somewhere unexpected. A corridor I had no memory of walking, a hatch I did not recall opening. Each time, I was certain I had been somewhere else entirely, though I could never grasp the details. Then, during a briefing with my officers, it happened in full. One moment I was standing at the command table, the next I was elsewhere. The walls around me were wrong, too tall, too curved, bending inward like the ribs of some immense beast. The floor beneath my boots was a mosaic of human teeth, set in patterns that made my skin crawl. I knew instantly that this was the cathedral from the crew's nightmares. I had crossed from dream to reality without warning. Far off, I heard the 9-note chime echoing through the vast, empty space. And in that moment, I understood. This was not merely a dream, it was an invitation. The altar was calling us home. The transition was seamless and horrifying. One instant, I stood amidst my officers on the command deck of the Orison. The next, I was alone, my voice swallowed by a silence, so vast it seemed to smother thought itself. The shift was not like falling asleep or waking. It was as if reality itself had folded in on me, replacing one world with another, without so much as a flicker. The air here was colder than any void-born chill I had ever known, sharp enough to burn my lungs with each breath. The space stretched impossibly far in every direction, a cathedral of titanic scale, built from materials I could not comprehend. Some sections resembled the sacred stonework of imperial chapels, others the twisted steel and riveted hull plating of a void ship, and others still seemed like bone, human or otherwise. None of it was uniform. It felt as though countless structures had been melted and fused together into a single, nightmarish whole. My boots sank slightly into the floor as I moved. Looking down, I saw it was composed of interlocking plates, each one etched with sigils that shifted beneath my gaze, refusing to remain still. At the edges of my vision, I thought I saw them form words in High Gothic, then in Binharic, then in languages that had no place in a human throat. The 9-note chime echoed through the vast space, growing louder as I walked. The sound did not reverberate like it should have in such a massive hall. Instead, it seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, as though the structure itself was humming in anticipation. With each cycle of the chime, my pulse quickened, syncing with its rhythm, until I could no longer tell where my heartbeat ended and the sound began. Shadows moved between the pillars that lined the endless net. At first I thought they were tricks of the light, my exhausted mind conjuring shapes where none existed. Then one of them shifted closer, resolving into a figure. It was a silhouette of a human crewman, frozen mid-step, its head bowed as if in prayer. I approached cautiously, hand resting on the hilt of my sidearm. When my lumen beam fell across its face, my breath caught. It was Peter Vass, one of my junior officers, though his eyes glowed faintly like coals in a dying fire. His skin was pale and waxy, and his lips moved silently, forming words I could not hear. I reached out to shake him, and my hand passed through his form as if through mist. He faded instantly, leaving behind only the echo of the 9-note chime. As I moved deeper into the cathedral, more of these figures appeared, crew members from every division of the Orison,
standing in silent rows, their bodies half real, half illusion. Some knelt in worship, others raised their arms as if conducting sacred rite. All of them radiated a quiet, terrible reverence. Then I saw the walls. What I had mistaken for intricate carvings were not decorations at all. They were bodies, countless human forms fused into the structure itself. The missing pilgrims, their skin stretched tight over machinery, their mouths open in perpetual song. The sound of the 9-note chime came from them, their throats vibrating in unison. The sight froze me in place. It was not song as we know. It was a signal, a constant transmission feeding into the bones of this place, sustaining it. Revulsion warred with fascination as I stumbled forward, unable to tear my gaze away. Some of the pilgrims still moved faintly, eyes fluttering open as I passed. One locked gazes with me, tears streaming silently down her face, before her lids closed forever. I knew then that this was no dream conjured from the void. It was a place, a real location outside the ship's boundaries, perhaps, outside space itself. And somehow through our dreams, through the signal infecting our unconscious minds, it had reached across the veil and pulled me inside. At the far end of the nave, raised upon a dais of pulsing machinery, stood the throne. It was larger than a battle tank, shaped from a mixture of bone and blackened steel. Teeth lined its backrest, like the spines of a predator, interlocking into a pattern that seemed almost purposeful. Blood, thick and dark, trickled from the seams between those teeth, pooling at its base, before vanishing into unseen conduits below. And there, seated upon the throne, was a figure. I could not tell if it was human or something far old. It was draped in tattered vestments, reminiscent of an imperial officer's coat, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too jointed, fingers tipped with metal hooks. Its head was bent forward, hidden in shadow, yet I felt its attention on me like the pressure of deep water. The chime reached a crescendo. The frozen crew shadows surrounding me bowed as one. My knees buckled against my will, my head pounded with the rhythm of the sound. I felt my own thoughts slip, scatter, reform into patterns not my own. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The figure on the throne raised its head. I glimpsed its face, a grotesque fusion of my navigator's features, and something far more alien. Her third eye was wide open, glowing with a light that burned straight into my soul. "You see now," it said, though its mouth did not move. The voice came from inside my skull, soft and terrible. "You are part of the pattern, always have been, always will be." The structure around me shuddered. The frozen silhouettes of my crew dissolved like mist. The fused pilgrims wailed as one, a keening note that pierced my ears and drove me to the ground. My vision blurred. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the bridge of the Orison, lying on the cold deck plates. My officers stood over me, shouting my name, shaking me away. In my hands, clutched so tightly my knuckles bled, was a relic, a fragment of blackened bone, fused with metal. It pulsed faintly in time with the 9-note chime, and deep within me, I knew the truth. This was no dream. The cathedral was real, and it was waiting for us to return. He moved closer, his mechadendrites extending to scan the object. As they passed near it, their metallic limbs spassed violently, as if recoiling from unseen heat. Drail himself shuddered, and the static hiss of his voice took on a tone that almost sounded like reverence. "This was drawn from the other side," he murmured. "The barrier between real space and the pattern has thinned. We are permeable." Caninus Solen spat on the deck, her trembling hands clutching her relic, as if to drive back the sight of mine. "Blasphemy." "That thing is an abomination. Destroy it before it corrupts us all." Before I could answer, the bridge vox burst to life. A crisp, authoritative voice filled the air, loud enough to silence every argument. It was a voice I knew well, Admiral Calvus of Battlefleet Cerberon, our direct superior. "This is Battlefleet Command," the transmission declared. "Vessel Orison, you are hereby ordered to execute immediate self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. You are compromised." For a moment, no one moved. The words hung there, impossible and final. The transmission repeated, exactly the same tone and cadence. Then again, 3 times in total, the same inflections, the same pause between sentences. It was too perfect. Solen fell to her knees, whispering prayers through pale lips. Several armsmen raised their weapons as if to carry out the order at once. Fear etched into every line of their faces, but I saw the subtle wrongness beneath the voice. I had served under Admiral Calvus for years. I knew the slight catch of his breath when he spoke too quickly, the edge of strain in his tone during moments of urgency. This voice had none of those imperfections. It was a flawless echo, like a recording played back by a machine. "No," I said sharply, It's fault. The inquisitorial attaché finally spoke, their voice soft but cutting through the chaos like a blade. On what basis do you claim that, Lieutenant? The Admiral never repeats himself verbatim, I said. He adapts, changes phrasing, even mid-command. This is mimicry. Drayle gave a low, static-laden laugh. It has learned our signals, he said. Our words are now weapons turned against us. The crew began to splinter before my eyes. Half believed the order genuine, convinced we were contaminated, and must sacrifice ourselves for the good of the Imperium. The others clung to my defiance, certain that the Void was attempting to trick us into annihilation. Arguments escalated into shoving, then into drawn weapons. I barked for order, my voice echoing through the command deck like a gunshot, but even I felt doubt creeping into my mind. What if it was real? What if the Emperor's will truly demanded our destruction? Before the conflict could break into full violence, Drayle activated the relic. He had interfaced it with his augmetic limbs, and now its pulsing glow merged with the ship's internal systems. The lights flickered, displays filled with static, and a surge of data poured across every screen. At first, it was meaningless noise, symbols and shifting lines like those we had seen before, but then the images resolved into something unmistakable, the Orison itself, not as it was now, but as it had been at every point in its existence. Deck layouts changed and shifted across the centuries, crews appeared and vanished, events replayed in fragmented loops. I saw the ship's construction, its consecration, its countless voyages through the void, and then, to my horror, I saw this mission. We had been here before. Over and over, the Orison entered the veil. Each time, the same sequence unfolded: arrival, anomaly, awakening of the altar, dissolution into the pattern. Each time, some fragment of the ship escaped. Sometimes, a recording, sometimes a survivor, sometimes, only wreckage carrying whispers. The pattern did not end with destruction, it simply reset. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. We've done this before, I whispered. We've always done this before. The final image froze on the screen, a fragment of Vox data buried deep within the ship's memory core. It was a recording of my own voice, grainy and distorted but unmistakable. This is Lieutenant Amanvara, it said. Execute self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. You are compromised. My knees nearly buckled. The crew stared at me with wide, accusing eyes. Solen screamed that I was a heretic, a pawn of the void. Others shouted in my defense, their voices ragged with desperation. The inquisitorial attaché stepped between us, raising one gloved hand for silence. Their expression remained unreadable, their voice calm as a frozen lake. Whether real or false, the outcome is the same. If we destroy the Orison, the pattern will endure. If we refuse, it will consume us whole. Either way, the galaxy remains blind. Their gaze locked with mine. What matters now is choice. Before I could respond, the Vox flared again. This time, the voice was my own, perfectly replicated. It issued the same order to destroy the ship, the same inflections, the same tone. My own voice, commanding our doom. The bridge erupted into chaos. Weapons were raised, factions broke apart entirely, and beneath it all, through the din of shouting and the sobbing of terrified crew, I heard the 9-note chime begin again, rising steadily, mocking us all. The bridge dissolved into chaos, a cacophony of shouts and accusations, the clash of weapons drawn in desperation rather than discipline. My own voice, the false order, still echoed from the Vox, repeating with mechanical precision as though mocking our indecision. It mingled with the steady, maddening pulse of the 9-note chime, until the two sounds seemed to merge into one, a rhythm that drove reason from men's minds. Navy armsmen, loyal to me, formed a defensive perimeter, their lasguns raised, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. Opposite them, the Mechanicus adepts clustered protectively around Drayle, chanting Benheric litanies as they activated their augmetic steel talons and whirring sawblades, extended with the sound of grinding teeth. Between the two factions, the ecclesiarchy congregation knelt in the flickering light, some praying, others screaming sermons that no longer resembled imperial liturgy. Their words twisted into new forms, alien cadences seeping into their voices. The first shot was inevitable. A lone armsman, trembling and weeping, fired into the ranks of the Mechanicus. The beam of his lasgun cut through a tech adept's chest, releasing a gout of smoke and sparking circuitry. That was the spark that ignited the blaze. Return fire erupted instantly, a storm of red beams and ricocheting projectiles. Screams filled the bridge as men and women who had served together for years turned their weapons upon one another. I bellowed for order, my voice raw and cracking, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. Even Solène was lost to frenzy, standing atop the command dais and crying out for the Emperor's wrath as she hurled burning censers into the crowd. Flames licked up torn banners and shattered purity seals, filling the air with acrid smoke that stung the eyes and throat. Through the carnage, the inquisitorial attaché moved like a phantom, untouched by stray shots, silent and implacable. Their gaze never left me. It was not command, nor protection they offered, only judgment. Then the ship itself began to change. The deck beneath our feet buckled, groaning like a living thing. Doors slammed shut without warning, cutting groups of fighters off from one another. The lumen strips flickered wildly, their patterns forming shifting symbols across the bulkheads, sigils that seemed to writhe when I tried to focus on them. Gravity surged and failed in violent spasms, hurling bodies into the air before smashing them down again with bone-breaking force. A chorus of voices joined the madness, not from the crew, but from the walls, the vents, the very steel of the Orison. It was a warped echo of our own words, orders we had given, prayers we had spoken, now thrown back at us in twisted harmony. The ship was learning us, consuming our language and feeding it back like a predator mimicking its prey. I led a desperate push toward the auxiliary control chamber, hacking through locked doors with my power sword while my loyalists held the rear. Blood ran in rivulets down the walls, mingling with oil and sacred incense. Somewhere behind us, the 9-note chime grew louder, faster, as though counting down to an unseen conclusion. We reached the chamber only to find it transformed. What should have been a sanctum of logic and machinery was now a grotesque parody of life. Control consoles pulsed like beating hearts, cables writhed like serpents, their ends tipped with teeth and barbed hooks. The air reeked of ozone and rotting flesh. Drail staggered forward, or replacing his usual cold precision. It is evolving, he breathed. The ship is becoming the pattern. This is the natural culmination. Natural, I snarled, grabbing him by the collar of his crimson robes. This is heresy. It's killing us. Before he could respond, a scream echoed from the corridor behind us. My loyalists were being cut down, not only by the Mechanicus, but by things that no longer resembled men at all. Twisted forms crawled along the walls and ceiling, mockeries of the crew. They wore our faces, our armor, even our insignia, but their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if their limbs were being guided by unseen hands. One of them looked directly at me. It had the sight froze me for a heartbeat, and in that moment it spoke in my exact voice. Execute self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. Rage snapped me free of the paralysis. I drove my blade through its chest, feeling both flesh and circuitry tear beneath the strike. The thing collapsed, leaking black ichor that hissed and steamed upon contact with the deck. We fell back again, forced to retreat deeper into the vessel. The corridors shifted behind us, closing off paths we had just used, opening new ones in impossible configuration. It was as if the Orison were reshaping itself with every step, driving us towards some unseen destination. Then came the final blow. Without warning, every display aboard the ship flickered to life, showing a single unified image, a vast void, darker than space itself. From its depths emerged the silhouette of a cathedral, the very same one I had seen in my dream state vision. The image pulsed in time with the 9-note chime, each beat rattling the teeth in my skull. The ship lurched violently. Gravity vanished completely, as alarms blared and the deck spun beneath us. "We're moving," one of my officers screamed. "Course change initiated. No helm input." The inquisitorial attaché's voice cut through the panic, calm and final. "It has chosen our destination." Through a viewport, I saw the impossible. The Orison hurtling toward the black void at a speed no Imperial engine could achieve. The cathedral was waiting for us, and the ship itself had become our deliverance. We had lost command. We were only passengers now, being carried into the maw of something vast, patient and utterly beyond comprehension. The void rushed to meet us, an endless horizon of darkness that seemed less like space and more like a living maw. The Orison shuddered and screamed, as its hull strained against forces no mortal ship was meant to endure. I clung to the railing, my teeth rattling in my skull, while alarms howled a dirge of impending collapse. The artificial gravity fluctuated violently, throwing bodies against bulkheads, and then dropping them without warning. Screams mingled with the groaning of tortured metal, indistinguishable from one another. Through the observation viewport, the shape ahead resolved into terrifying clarity. The cathedral I had seen in my vision was real, looming vast and silent, suspended within the void. Its spires rose impossibly high, disappearing into a black sky that was not a sky at all. The structure seemed to breathe, its outer walls flexing subtly, as if the entire edifice were a single colossal organism. Its surface was composed of the same amalgam of steel and bone I had seen before, a grotesque reflection of both imperial architecture and something far older. Drael's mechadendrites trembled with barely contained ecstasy. "The pattern's heart," he whispered, his voice crackling. "We are witnessing divinity in its purest form, the Omnissiah's truth." "Silence," I snarled, though my own voice faltered. Even as I hated what I saw, a small treacherous part of me felt awe. It was magnificent in its horror, a testament to design beyond comprehension. The 9-note chime resonated through every deck, now so loud it rattled the ship's structure. It no longer felt external. It came from within our bones, our teeth, the very rhythm of our blood. Crew members screamed and clutched their skulls. Some collapsed outright, spasming on the deck, as if in worship or siege. Others began to speak in unison, their voices merging into a single droning chant. The words were not Gothic or Benheric, yet I understood them on some primal level. Return, complete, become. The Orison lurched as if in response. Our engines were cold, dead, yet we accelerated toward the cathedral with impossible speed. "Brace for impact," I shouted, though some part of me knew there would be no collision. This was not a physical journey. The ship passed through the cathedral's outer walls without resistance. There was no crash, no tearing of steel, only a momentary sensation of suffocation, as though every atom of our bodies had been weighed, measured, and permitted entry. Then, without transition, we were in.
The bridge's lumen strips flickered, and I realized they were no longer powered by our generators. A sickly glow emanated from the walls themselves, pulsating faintly like the heartbeat of a slumbering beast. Displays lit with symbols that shifted too quickly to read, forming and unforming faster than the human eye could follow. The Orison was no longer a vessel. It was part of this place now. We drifted into a vast central chamber, one that mirrored the nave from my earlier vision. Crew members collapsed to their knees as the scale of it overwhelmed them. Even Solan was struck silent, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. At the center of that nightmarish hall stood the throne. It was larger than I remembered, a monolith of blackened bone and warped metal. Teeth still jutted from its backrest, but now they moved, flexing like the ribs of some colossal predator. A river of dark fluid flowed from beneath it, vanishing into grates carved with sigils too intricate to comprehend. The throne did not simply sit in the chamber, it dominated it, as though the entire structure had been built to serve its presence, and seated upon it was the figure. Her form had changed since last I saw her. What remained of Navigator Cithra was barely recognizable. Her body was elongated, twisted into new proportions. Her limbs had multiplied, branching like the roots of a tree. Her third eye blazed with an unholy light, and her mouth stretched in a silent scream. The tattered remnants of her navigator's garb still clung to her, mockery of the woman she had once been. The inquisitorial attaché stepped forward, their voice cutting through the madness like a blade. "It has chosen a vessel," they said calmly. "This is the anchor. Destroy it and the pattern collapses." Drael spun on them, his mechadendrites flaring. "No, to harm it is to sever the link, to deny us transcendence. This is the culmination of all design." Before I could intervene, the ship itself betrayed us. Bulkheads groaned as living cables shot from the walls, ensnaring crew members and dragging them screaming into the dark. Others fell into ecstatic trances, their bodies twitching as if puppeted by unseen hands. I fought to keep my footing as the deck tilted sharply, throwing us toward the throne. Cithra, or what she had become, raised one clawed hand. The 9-note chime ceased. In its place came a single sustained tone so low it vibrated in my bones. Then she spoke. Her voice was layered, containing countless echoes, some familiar, some alien. "You have always come, you have always built. Each cycle adds to the whole, each failure feeds the next. You are part of me, and I of you." Visions exploded behind my eyes. I saw centuries of voyages, endless crews aboard countless versions of the Orison, all drawn here, all repeating the same doomed pattern. Each time, they believed they had free will. Each time, they served only to complete the design. I staggered, choking on bile. "Why?" I managed to whisper. Cithra's head tilted, and I knew the answer before she gave it. "Because you dream." The inquisitorial attaché drew their weapon and fired, a bolt of searing light striking the throne. The blast vanished into its surface without effect. Cithra's many eyes turned toward them, and with a single gesture, Their body unraveled into threads of flesh and bone that drifted upward like smoke. "Your weapons are meaningless," she intoned. "Only choice remains." The floor beneath us split open, revealing a pit of writhing machinery and pulsing organs. The ship trembled violently as if the cathedral itself were breathing. Crew members tumbled screaming into the abyss. I realized then that this was not merely a throne room, it was a crucible, a place where the pattern would either be completed or remade, and I knew with sick certainty that whatever choice I made next would not end with us. It would ripple outward to every star, every soul, every dream yet to come. The pit yawned beneath us, vast and bottomless, a chasm of writhing machinery and pale wet flesh. The sound it made was worse than any scream, a ceaseless grinding rhythm that matched the pulse of my own heart. The 9-note chime returned, now woven into that rhythm so tightly that it felt as if my very thoughts were no longer my own. Around me the crew was breaking. Some hurled themselves willingly into the abyss, their mouths stretched into ecstatic grins as they vanished into the grinding dark. Others fought with mindless rage, striking at anything nearby, ally or foe, with hands, teeth, or whatever weapons they still possessed. Solange clutched her relic and shrieked verses from the Lectitio Divinitatis, though the words twisted as they left her tongue, becoming guttural alien syllables that made my ears bleed to hear. Drael had fallen fully to madness. He stood at the edge of the pit, his mechadendrites writhing, his body swaying like a supplicant at prayer. "Perfection," he crooned, his vox synth distorting his voice into a chorus of layered tones. "At last the pattern reveals itself in full. We are the gears, we are the His augmetics detached from his back one by one, and flung themselves into the pit, drawn like offerings to a god. His flesh followed moments later, his body tearing apart willingly. I staggered toward the throne, my blade in hand, but every step was a battle. The floor itself shifted beneath me, rising and falling like waves on a black sea. From the shadows emerged more of the mockery creatures, wearing the faces of my crew, wearing my own. They reached for me with grasping hands, whispering my own thoughts back at me, memories I had never spoken aloud. "You have always come," they hissed. "You have always chosen." I cut through them with savage fury, each blow accompanied by a scream that might have been theirs or my own. Their forms dissolved into mist as they fell, leaving no trace but the lingering echo of laughter. Sithra sat unmoving upon the throne, her many eyes blazing like stars. Her voice filled the chamber, and my mind simultaneously. "There is no ending," she said, "only iteration. When one pattern collapses, another begins. You are not the first to stand here, you will not be the last." Visions flooded my senses. I saw the Orison as it had been, and as it would be, countless times over. Different faces, different crews, different centuries, but always the same journey, the same arrival, the same altar awaiting completion. Each cycle fed the next, a loop stretching back into the dawn of time, and forward into eternity. I saw myself among them not just once but endless, 1,000 variations of me, making 1,000 different choices, all of them leading here. In some visions, I destroyed the throne, in others I knelt before it, in still others I simply walked away into the void. It made no difference, each path only wove tighter into the whole. "No," I whispered, though it was barely more than breath, "there must be a way to break it." Sithra's head tilted, her mouth stretching into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "To break it is to create another. Even destruction serves the pattern. You cannot unmake what you are part of." The floor shifted violently beneath my feet, tilting me toward the pit. I fell to my knees, gripping the hilt of my sword so tightly that blood ran down the blade. Crew members tumbled past me into the abyss, their screams merging with the grinding rhythm below. Among them I saw Solange vanish, her final prayer lost in the chime's endless repetition. The inquisitorial attaché's weapon lay near the edge, where they had been unmade. I crawled toward it, each movement an agony. My mind was filled with voices overlapping and discordant. Some begged me to destroy the throne, others pleaded for surrender, still others whispered of escape, though none could say. When my hand closed around the weapon, a strange clarity came over me. The voices did not cease, but they no longer mattered. Only one thing mattered: choice. I rose, staggering forward until I stood before the throne. Sithra gazed down at me, her glowing third eye burning through my skull. "You understand now," she said. "You are the final piece. Choose and the pattern will be complete." Behind me the chamber convulsed. The pit widened, swallowing whole sections of the deck. The 9-note chime accelerated, each cycle faster, sharper, until it became a single continuous scream. The cathedral itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. I lifted the weapon. My own reflection stared back at me from its polished surface, not as I was, but as I had been in the vision, 1,000 different versions of myself, all frozen at the moment of decision. The truth struck me then, terrible and undeniable. It had never been about Cithra or the throne or the ship. The pattern was not external. It was us, our choices, our dreams, endlessly repeating, endlessly feeding the cycle. I thought of the recording we had found, my own voice giving the order to destroy the Orison. It had not been a trick. It had been a memory from another iteration, and now I stood where he had stood, ready to repeat his failure. Cithra's many mouths opened at once, her voice rising in a deafening crescendo. Choose! I screamed, and fired. The blast struck the throne directly in the center of its blackened heart. For an instant, there was silence. Then everything came apart. The cathedral dissolved into raw, blinding light. The walls of the Orison peeled away like paper. I felt my body stretch, fragment, scatter across an infinity of possible worlds. In that final instant, I understood the pattern fully. There was no victory, no defeat, only motion, endless and recursive. When the light faded, I stood once more on the bridge, my hands clenched around the relic, my officers alive and unaware of what had transpired. The chronometers read 0. This is Lieutenant Amon Vera, it said. Execute self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. You are compromised. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, the 9-note chime began again. The sound of my own voice issuing the order to destroy the Orison left me paralyzed. It was not merely the horror of recognition, but the cold, undeniable truth beneath it. We had been here before, many times. My officers stared at me, fear and confusion etched into their faces. Some began to murmur prayers, others accusation. The air on the bridge felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for my response. The 9-note chime grew louder, no longer distant but rising from deep within the ship itself. With each beat, the deck trembled beneath our feet, subtle at first, then violently enough to throw crew to the ground. Panels burst open along the bulkheads, spilling cables that writhed like serpents, their tips glowing faintly as though hungry. The lights dimmed to a hellish red hue, painting every face in the color of fresh blood. Magaustrael staggered forward, his remaining augmetics twitching spasmodically. His voice, when it came, was frayed with static and awe. The ship is awakening. The pattern nears completion. The sacrifice engine stirs. At his words, the crew broke into panic. Some ran for escape pods, others for weapons, others simply fell to their knees, weeping. I forced my way through them to the central control dice, seizing Drail by the collar of his crimson robe. Explain, I demanded, though my voice trembled. What is the sacrifice engine? His head jerked unnaturally as he answered, as if the words were not entirely his own. The culmination of all design, a machine that feeds on will, on dream, it was built not by us, but through us. Every voyage, every crew, every death, offerings to its growth. Now it is whole. His eyes glimmered with a mad reverence, and now it must be fed. Even as he spoke, the ship began to move with purpose. We felt it through the deck, the subtle shift of mass, the rhythmic pounding like the heartbeat of some colossal creature. Vox channels flooded with distorted voices, 1,000 overlapping whispers, all chanting the same words. Return, complete, become. The bridge displays flickered to life, showing the lower decks in grainy, stuttering images. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. The missing pilgrims were there, or what remained of them. They were bound to vast, whirring machinery, their bodies stretched and spliced with cables and gears. Some still breathed, their mouths opening and closing in silent scream. Their blood ran through transparent conduits, mingling with the ship's hydraulic fluids, powering systems that had no right to exist. The machinery shifted and rearranged itself, forming intricate patterns that pulsed in time with the 9-note. Selene fell to her knees, her relic clattering from her hands. Holy Emperor, preserve us, she sobbed. This is no ship, it is an altar. I could barely speak. Where is this happening? Drail raised a shaking hand toward the display. The deepest level, the place you call the reactor core, but it is no longer that. It is the heart of the pattern, the sacrifice engine itself. The images shifted again,
and I saw something that made my blood freeze. Among the bound figures were members of my crew. Men and women I had spoken to only hours before were now fused into the machinery, their eyes wide and unseeing, their veins glowing faintly with light that pulsed in rhythm with the chime. Each beat drew more of them inward, their bodies folding and twisting into the design. The 9-note chime shifted suddenly, becoming more rapid, more insistent. Drail swayed as if in ecstasy. "It calls for completion," he intoned. "It requires one final offering." My stomach turned to ice. "What offer?" He turned to me, and for the first time, his voice was clear, unclouded by madness. "You," he said simply, "the commander must seal the pattern. The throne waits for its last piece." Before I could respond, the ship convulsed violent. The bridge split down the center as jagged spires of bone and metal erupted upward, separating my loyalists from those who had already succumbed to madness. The air filled with screams as cables lashed out like whips, dragging crew members into the wall. The inquisitorial attaché, who had until now remained silent, stepped forward, drawing a blade of blackened steel. "He speaks truth," they said coldly. "I have seen this before, not here, not on this ship, but in other places, other cycles. The commander's will is always the keystone." "Then end me now," I roared. "Break the cycle." They hesitated, their weapon poised. For a moment, I saw conflict in their usually impassive eyes, but before they could strike, the floor beneath them split open, and they were dragged screaming into the abyss below. I stood alone before the surviving crew, half of whom stared at me with pleading desperation, while the others whispered my name like a prayer. Selene clutched my arm, her eyes wild. "If you give yourself to it, perhaps you can unmake it. Perhaps this can finally end, or perhaps I will only begin it again," I said bitterly. The displays changed once more, showing the heart of the sacrifice engine. The bound figures writhed and convulsed as the machinery consumed them, their shapes merging into something vast and terrible. In the center of it all, a space waited, shaped perfectly to hold a single human form. The 9-note chime reached its peak, a deafening crescendo that filled every corner of the ship. Drail fell prostrate, his voice breaking into static-laced praise. "The final piece, the final dream." I knew then that there was no path left but forward. Whether this ended or began again, I could not remain still. I drew my sword, the weight of it grounding me in the chaos, and turned to the others. "Seal the bridge," I ordered. "If I do not return, vent the reactor and destroy this place." None moved to obey. They only stared, knowing as I did, that orders no longer mattered. The ship itself began to descend, carrying us deeper into its own living core. The bulkheads melted away, revealing a vast chamber lit by the glow of pulsing veins and grinding gears. The smell of blood and ozone was suffocating. At the center stood the sacrifice engine. It pulsed like a heart, beating in time with the chime, and in its center the waiting space beckoned, a hollow throne of flesh and metal, whispering my name. The chamber trembled as I stepped toward the sacrifice engine. Each pulse of its vast throbbing heart seemed to push against my skin, as though the very air resisted my movement. The walls around me were alive, lined with veins of glowing fluid that flowed upward into shadowed heights, carrying the blood of countless victims into unseen reservoirs. Their faces, half-formed and half-dissolved, writhed within the organic machinery, silent mouths, opening and closing in voiceless agony. I could feel their terror in my bones, a chorus of pleading that was not sound, but memory, seared into the ship's very structure. Behind me, the surviving crew had fallen silent. Some knelt in surrender, their eyes vacant as if awaiting judgment. Others clutched their weapons with white-knuckled hands, but none dared fire. Even Selene, who had been so fierce in her faith, now crouched beside the dais, rocking back and forth, while whispering fragments of prayers to a god who seemed impossibly distant. The 9-note chime slowed, each toll drawn out until it became a single, unbroken note. It was no longer an external sound, but something inside my skull, a vibration in my marrow. With each beat, the hollow throne at the center of the engine shifted, shaping itself to fit me perfectly. There was no question of its intent. It had always been waiting for me. Drail lay prostrate near the base of the machine, his body trembling with ecstasy. His remaining augmetics twitched spasmodically, as if they too hungered to merge with the structure. "The cycle comes to its perfect end," he rasped, his voice breaking into stat. "You are the keystone commander. Sit upon the throne and become. The dream demands it." I gripped my sword tighter, the blade feeling impossibly small in my hands compared to the vastness of the thing before me. My own heartbeat had merged with the rhythm of the engine, so that I could no longer tell where I ended, and it began. I thought of all that had led to this moment, the false orders, the shifting corridors, the vanished pilgrims. It had all been orchestrated to bring me. Solenne's voice broke through the haze, ragged and desperate. "Do not listen to it," she screamed. "Destroy it, end this blasphemy, even if it takes us all with it." Her plea ignited a final fragile spark of defiance within me. I raised my weapon, intending to strike at the heart of the machine. The sacrifice engine reacted instantly. Cables lashed out, wrapping around my limbs, and dragging me toward the throne. I fought with every ounce of strength, hacking through the cords even as others replaced them. My loyalists opened fire, their lasguns blazing, but the shots vanished into the living walls without leaving so much as a scorch mark. Through the chaos, Cithra's voice filled the chamber once more, not the warped layered tone from before, but her true voice, as I had known it at the start of our voyage. Calm, familiar. "Amon," she said softly, and hearing my name spoken so gently almost undid me. "It is not an enemy, it is completion. Sit, and it will be finished. No more loops, no more loss." I faltered. In that moment of hesitation, the cables surged forward and lifted me bodily into the air. My sword fell from my grip, clattering against the pulsating floor. I was carried toward the hollow throne, its surface glistening with blood and oil, its contours shaped to my form. As my back touched it, visions flooded me. I saw every iteration of myself across the cycles, countless versions of Amon Vera, each believing he had a choice, each ultimately playing the same role. Some fought to the bitter end, others surrendered willingly, some tried to flee. All became part of the pattern. Their memories were mine now, a vast ocean of failure and futility. Then the visions shifted, showing what would come if I joined them. Entire star systems bound together into living engines, fleets of ships transformed into cathedrals drifting through the void, every dreamer across the galaxy, feeding the great design. The Emperor's light extinguished, replaced by the endless, perfect repetition of the pattern. "No," I roared, summoning the last remnants of my will. With a surge of strength born of sheer desperation, I tore one arm free, and grabbed the fallen sword. The machine screamed, not with sound, but with a pulse that rattled every atom of my being. The cables constricted, trying to crush me, but I plunged the blade into the glowing vein that ran through the throne's center. The effect was instantaneous. The chamber convulsed violently, walls collapsing inward, as the engine let out a final shuddering note. The bound bodies dissolved into ash. The cables writhed madly, flinging me aside as they recoiled. Drail's scream was cut short as his form melted into a puddle of molten metal and bone. For a single blinding moment, there was silence. No chime, no voice, nothing but the harsh sound of my own breathing, and the panicked sobs of the surviving crew. The oppressive weight that had hung over us since entering the veil lifted, leaving a hollow emptiness in its wake. I stumbled to my feet, staring at the ruin of the sacrifice engine. It was dead, or at least dormant. Its vast heart had ceased beating. The hollow throne was nothing more than a jagged husk. Solenne rose unsteadily beside me, her face streaked with tears and ash. "Is it over?" she whispered. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell her yes. But before I could speak, the bridge vox crackled to life. A voice came through. My voice. "This is Lieutenant Amon Vera," it said, calm and precise. "Execute self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. You are compromised." The surviving crew turned to me in unison, their faces pale with terror. I could only stare back at them, my mouth dry, my throat closed, and then faintly, almost too faint to hear, the 9-note chime began again, slow, tentative, as if testing the air. The silence was over. The chime was faint at first, like a breath heard through a bulkhead, but it was there, slow, patient, insidious. Each note struck like a drop of water on bare skin, harmless alone yet maddening in its inevitability. My hands clenched around the railing of the ruined chamber, knuckles white, as if physical force could stop the sound from worming its way into my mind. The surviving crew stared at me, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. Some wept openly, others whispered prayers so softly they were almost inaudible. None dared to move. They were waiting for me, for an answer, for salvation that would never come. Solenne's voice finally broke the silence, hoarse and trembling. "You destroyed it," she said, half statement, half plea. The sacrifice engine is gone. It must be gone. I turned toward the shattered remains of the throne, jagged fragments jutting from the deck like broken teeth. No light pulsed within it now, no cables writhed, no voices whispered. It was lifeless, inert, yet I could not shake the feeling that it was not dead, merely dormant, like an animal feigning stillness, while it waited to strike. I thought so, I murmured, though my voice betrayed my doubt. The vox crackled again, cutting through the chamber like a blade. My own voice emerged from the speakers, precise and calm, repeating the order, once more: execute self-destruction, containment protocols are active, you are compromised. Each syllable was perfect. There was no distortion, no delay. It might have been me speaking now, save that I stood frozen in place, unable to draw breath. The crew recoiled as if struck. Several backed toward the walls, while others fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Selene screamed in defiance, but even her cry was swallowed by the repetition of my voice. With each playback, it grew louder, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate in harmony with it. This is not possible, one of the surviving officers whispered. The transmitter is offline. All systems are dead. Not dead, I corrected, my throat dry. Rebuilt. The ship is the system now. It doesn't need machinery to speak. Drail's absence was suddenly palpable. His madness had been a warning, a precursor of what awaited. In his final moments he had called the sacrifice engine perfect, a culmination. Perhaps he had been right, perhaps destruction had only completed it. The 9-note chime grew louder, twining with the playback of my voice, until they merged into a single sickening rhythm. The deck plates beneath us began to shift, rising and falling like the breath of some vast creature. Shapes emerged from the walls, indistinct at first, then unmistakable. Faces. They were the faces of my crew, men and women who had died over the course of our journey, their features now part of the living metal. Their eyes opened in unison, glowing faintly, and their mouths moved in perfect synchronization with the chime, not screaming, not pleading. The chamber itself began to warp, walls folding inward, corridors collapsing into new configurations. It was the same phenomenon we had witnessed in the lower decks, but now it was total. The entire ship was reshaping itself around. We have to leave, one of the armsmen shouted, voice cracking. Escape pods, shuttles, anything. There's nowhere to go, I said flatly. Look. Through the viewport we saw only darkness, no stars, no warp light, nothing but a black void stretching to infinity. The Orison floated alone, suspended in a space that was not space. Even the familiar sensation of inertia was gone. It was as if we existed outside time itself. Selene clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Then what are we? She demanded. Where are we? I had no answer, only a terrible certainty. We are where we've always been, I said. At the end, at the beginning, the walls pulsed in response, and the faces of the dead spoke as one, their collective voice, a perfect mirror of my own. You have always come, you have always built, you will always return. My knees nearly buckled under the weight of those words. This was not a taunt or threat, it was simple fact. The cycle had not been broken when I destroyed the throne, it had been renewed. I staggered toward the central console, half blind with fury and despair. My hands slammed against the controls, but they no longer obeyed me. Symbols danced across the displays, the same shifting patterns we had seen at the very beginning. This time, I understood them. They were not merely blueprints or instructions. They were a story, our story. Every decision we had made, every life lost, every scream, every prayer, all etched into an endless tapestry. And at its center was me, repeating my role endlessly, as inevitable as gravity. The realization hollowed me out. I turned to the others, desperate to make them understand, but the words caught in my throat. Their faces were already changing, eyes clouding over, mouths stretching into silent hymns. One by one, they sank to their knees, their bodies merging with the deck as the ship claimed them. Selene reached for me with her final breath, her expression one of both horror and acceptance. Then she was gone, reduced to nothing but another face in the wall. Alone now, I stumbled back, my boots slipping in the thin layer of ash that had once been my crew. The chime reached its final cadence, and for a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then the vox spoke again, my voice calm and perfect. This is Lieutenant Amanvira, it said. Execute self-destruction. Containment protocols are active. You are compromised. The exact words I had heard before now echoing into eternity. I looked down and realized I was holding the relic once more, its surface slick with my own blood. It pulsed gently in time with the chime. I had not picked it up. It had never left my hand. The chamber dissolved around me, replaced by the familiar confines of the bridge. My officers stood at their stations, alive and unaware, exactly as they had been at the start of our voyage. Chronometers read 000. I opened my mouth but no sound came. Outside the viewport, the void stretched infinite and black, and somewhere within it, faint but growing, the 9-note chime began again, and I understood at last. There was no end, only echoes, forever.